The public sphere of the women's movement is very hard to criticize. Women having the right to get an education and being treated fair in the workplace, not being discriminated against, and having basic rights. That is a very hard part to criticize, and also that is the part of the feminist movement that is not thought of when people think of the feminist movement. Because there's very few people that will criticize those aspects. It's the second strain of the feminist movement that gets significantly more attention and that most people think of when they think of the feminist movement. And that is the private sphere. The private sphere involves personal and body autonomy, self-determination, and also violence, or violence against women. As a generalization, this group was younger and they were more radical, naturally. Younger people are more radical. There is, of course, a lot of overlap in the two, and it's not a clean cut, but a generalization. They're younger, more radical, but it's looking at especially concerned with personal body autonomy and self-determination, or being able to choose, make choices about their life and their happiness, especially when it comes to marriage. One of the most fundamental parts of the entire feminist movement is sexual and reproductive rights. And the reason this is so important is because women being legally second-class citizens is not an American thing. It's a human thing. It happens. That is the norm in societies all over the world. Korea, Japan, China, Americas, European countries, I mean, everywhere. This is the norm. There are exceptions, but those exceptions are very notable. And a major reason for it is women carrying babies. The process of being pregnant, it is very difficult. And then having the baby and then caring for the baby, it is inherently a very difficult process. And so it is a fundamentally important part of the entire feminist movement. Now, feminist movement will coincide with a sexual revolution that takes place kind of like during the 1920s. And so society will become more tolerant of premarital sex and just women becoming more sexually active. And the numbers are pretty telling. In 1950, about 20% of women that were 19 had engaged in premarital sex. By 1990, it was about 75% of women. And the double standard between women and men having premarital sex has largely evaporated. And that is a major, major part of the sexual revolution. But it's really important to understand that it's not just about sex. It's also about, and more importantly for the broader women's movement, women being able to choose if and when they have children. Being able to control if and when they have children is vitally important for women because it has three major consequences. A lot more, but again, survey level history classes have to do a lot of generalization, but three really important ones. One, women being able to stay in college and stay in school. Two, women being able to have careers outside of the home. And three, women's life expectancy becoming greater than men's. The single most dangerous thing for women in human history is childbirth. So women being able to control if and when they have children has been an absolutely vital part of the entire feminist movement. Now, just like with the first strain of the feminist movement that looks at the public sphere, it is an oversimplification to say that the second strain that involved the private sphere can be attributed to any one person. But the person that is best representative and will become the face of this second strain is Gloria Steinem. Steinem is an incredibly fascinating person and actually had a lot of similarities to Betty Friedan. She was also an investigative journalist, but she will be a different kind of feminist, a younger feminist, and very concerned about expanding feminism and making it more accessible and more inclusive. Now, she was born insanely poor, to a really poor family in Ohio in 1934. And her family was so dysfunctional, by the age of 10, she was the primary caregiver for her siblings. She didn't complete one full year of school until she was 12. Now, what made Steinem different? And this is true for, there's so many examples of this, is she read all the time. She read about a book a day. That is, same thing was true about Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, but people that read all the time, that seems to be a very good prerequisite for doing something great later on in life. And so, even though she didn't complete an entire year of school until she turned 12, she'll eventually go to Smith College. It's the same school that Betty Friedan went to, and she graduated with honors with a degree in government and politics. She then goes on to have a 2-year fellowship in India and will become a hard-nosed investigative journalist. And she will especially capture America's attention when she goes undercover at the Playboy clubs. Playboy, the magazine, had these clubs all over the country, and she ended up working at one of them undercover and then wrote about it in 1963 for Show magazine. And she detailed how degrading it was, how men would, grope her and do all sorts of just incredibly inappropriate sexual things. And she was told, well, it's your job. You have to take it. Also, how many of them, most of them were married. They'd have a special room in the back in a lot of places that were soundproof, so men could go in and call their wives and say, yeah, I'm at the office working late. And it was just considered normal. It was very normal at the time. Again, not all men did it, but it was considered normal and acceptable. So she will become the face of the feminist movement, and in 1971 will found Miss Magazine, the very first national feminist periodical. In the first year alone, it'll have some 500,000 subscribers. And it was very groundbreaking in that Miss Magazine dealt with topics that weren't normally discussed, such as abortion, sexual harassment, workplace inequalities, same-sex marriage, homosexuality in general. So she dealt with a lot of more taboo topics. And she will dedicate her life to advancing women's causes in general. She was so popular that she was such a prolific writer, such a great fundraiser, that she made a career at being a speaker. But at every one of her public speaking events, she would donate half of her fees to a women's organization. And also she insisted on every time that she was giving a public speech on sharing the lectern with a minority. Whether it be Black, Hispanic, Asian, but she would insist on having someone from an unrepresented group up on stage with her. So she will become the face of the feminist movement, and she'll become a feminist icon, and is credited with expanding the feminist movement. Betty Friedan and her, they worked together at several points, but Betty Friedan was always very, it is not an understatement to say, jealous of her. And even Betty Friedan's friends would say that she was jealous. One of my favorite Benjamin Franklin quotes, he had so many good ones, but said, if you want to know a woman's faults, compliment her to her friends. Such a smartass. One of the most important developments in terms of sexual and reproductive rights was the development of oral contraceptives. Now, oral contraceptives, the FDA will deem them, the FDA will approve them, oral contraceptives as being safe in 1960. And from 1960 to 1975, the number of women that reported using birth control would spike up from 27% to 50%. The pill, as it's colloquially known, will become it is revolutionary. And there are critiques of it, and there are health problems that are now we're finding out are associated with it, but it is the single most popular form of birth control in the United States. When it was made legal in 1961, there was about 400,000 women on it. Within just 2 years, it will be about 2.3 million. And as of 2020, it is something around 47 million. So the numbers just continue to grow. And this has all sorts of implications, but one of them, of course, is the decline of the birth rate. You can't say the pill has caused this. The pill allowed women to stay in school and stay in college, which invariably means they're going to have less kids, but it is a major factor for them being able to stay in school and college. So the birth rate in the United States has continuously declined, as it has in every industrialized nation in the world. So it's not just an American thing. 1960, it was about 3.6 children per woman. 1970s, 2.5. Since 1980, it has never gone above 2 children per woman. And as of 2020, it's 1.6 children on average per woman in the United States. So the number has gone down. And the reason it became so popular is because of this court case here, Griswold v. Connecticut, and make sure you know this. It is vitally important. Griswold v. Connecticut, contraceptives were illegal for a long time. State laws prevented the use of contraceptives of any kind, and there were states that were getting rid of it. But it was a state-by-state thing until Griswold v. Connecticut. And you must know this case because Griswold v. Connecticut is fundamentally important. In the case, the Supreme Court will rule that these laws violated women's constitutional right to privacy. So after Griswold v. Connecticut, contraceptives are legal everywhere. And this is vitally important to understand because Griswold v. Connecticut is the case that established a constitutional right to privacy. And it is the basis. it is the precedent for so many other pieces of legislation, or for so many other Supreme Court decisions, like Loving v. Virginia. We'll talk about Roe v. Wade. We'll talk about Lawrence v. Hodges, which decriminalized homosexual relations were illegal in Texas until 2003, and that will be overturned by Lawrence v. Texas, which based its rulings on Griswold v. Connecticut, and Obergefell v. Hodge, 2015. It's when Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. They all stem from Griswold v. Connecticut. It's very important to know. So that is a huge, Griswold v. Connecticut is massive, and oral contraceptives is a huge part of the women's movement and women's ability to control when and if they have children. There were also several landmark cases that involved marriage that will be vitally important for what we call self-determination, or women, being able to live their lives the way they want to. And one major case is Loving v. Virginia. This involved a interracial couple that were living in Virginia. The woman was African-American, Mildred Loving, and her husband was Richard Loving. They were in love, and they went to Washington, D.C. and got married because they couldn't get married in Virginia. It was against the law. They then came back to Virginia, and they will have, the police will just bust in to their house one early Friday morning and arrest them. The police were actually hoping to catch them in the middle of having sex, because that is illegal. That was illegal. It violated Virginia's, it was called the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. If you want to talk about something that resembles Nazi Germany, racial integrity laws. Now, what they would end up arresting them for is being married in Virginia, and claiming that their marriage certificate from D.C. was legitimate in Virginia. So they were found guilty of violating the Racial Integrity Act, and in Virginia that was a felony. They were sentenced to a year in prison, or they could both leave the state as long as they guaranteed they would not return together for at least 25 years. Now, their entire family was in Virginia. And when it got to the during the case, the county judge that oversaw it, this is what he said when they sued in the state. Almighty God creates the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents, and but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. And that is the judge that over in Virginia, in the county, that was arguing for the state of Virginia in front of the Supreme Court. So it's very strange to me that now most people can agree that that sounds insane. At the time, and this is not very long ago, that did not sound insane to a lot of people. Obviously, when it got up to the Supreme Court, the Lovings were supported by the ACLU. Supreme Court will strike down any law banning interracial marriage. And they will base their ruling partly on Griswold v. Connecticut and equal protection due process But Griswold v. Connecticut will be important in that. And today, that is a very important thing to understand about marriage in general. According to the Constitution, according to Supreme Court decisions, a contract made in one state must be respected in another state. And so having separate laws for marriage, it inherently cannot work in the United States. Because marriage is a contract between two individuals that has to be approved, or you have to go to the courthouse to get it legitimized. And so that is a contract that it is not possible to have it legal in some places and illegal in other places, because that is a contract that must be respected everywhere. So that is why same-sex marriage, that is why that is so controversial. The decision, that was a decision by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. So there are very few people that will argue against interracial marriage. But just remember, at the time, there were a lot of people that said, no, this is just the way marriage has always been. And it's the way marriage is supposed to be, and it is absolutely normal. And they were absolutely certain about that at the time. Another important development in terms of marriage involves women's right to protect themselves in their own home. And before the mid-1970s, marital rape was not a thing. It did not exist. If you were married, if a woman was married, then it was legally impossible for a husband to rape his wife because it was considered a marital privilege. The act of getting married meant that all sex was consensual, and a husband had as the court said, quote, an absolute sexual right to his spouse's body. Now, in the mid-1970s, there were several states that had started changing it. And by 1978, there were only 3 states that had absolutely no laws against, or no laws about marital rape. And that was Oregon, Delaware, and Iowa. Then a case will come up in Oregon that will get so much national attention that it will change the way everyone views this topic. And it involved a guy named John Rideout and his 23-year-old wife. He raped her, beat her in front of their 2-year-old child. She'll bring a lawsuit. And what's crazy is in 1978, this is John Rideout. It's the very first time in U.S. history a man faced trial for raping his wife. Very, very first time. And what's even more crazy is he was acquitted. Went before the court and didn't get all the way up to the national court, but went before the court and he was acquitted. His lawyer said a woman who's still in a marriage is presumably consenting to sex. Maybe this is the risk of being married, you know? If this law's interpretation isn't corrected, it will bring a flock of rape cases under very bad circumstances. The remedy is to get out of the marital situation. So he argued that John Rideout had a right to do what he did. And what's crazy is there was no even denying that he did what he did. They didn't even try to deny it. They just said, yeah, but he's married. And he will be acquitted. This event, it really upset a lot of people. And it will get by 1993, all states had marital rape laws on the books. And today all states do. However, in only 17 states today even, marital rape is treated as equal to non-marital rape. So in most states, marital rape is legally treated differently as other kind of rape, which is why the single most dangerous place for a woman, based on the data, is in her home. And the most dangerous thing that women have to worry about is her spouse. Anyone who watches true crime, they know that's true, but also if you look at the broad data, that is 100% true. The most dangerous thing for women are spouse or some sort of family member. Again, not every woman experiences this the same, but it is the most dangerous place for a woman. If you're wondering what happened to this, John Rideout, he will be, in 2013, he was charged with assaulting 2 other women when he was like, I think at the time he was 55 years old in 2013. And 2017, he was sentenced to 16 years in jail. So, yeah, he was not what you'd call a stellar fellow. Now, what's also interesting about this case is that the lawyer argued that the remedy is to get out of the marriage, but there was a problem with that. Women couldn't get out of marriages quite often. That is because in most places there was not no-fault divorce laws. And this is a really important aspect of self-determination for women. Also men, but especially women. No-fault divorce means that couples are allowed to end their marriage without either party being to blame, and, more importantly, with only one party wanting to split. So if one party wants to split, the other doesn't, it doesn't matter what the other person wants. Then one person can say, I do not want to be with them. Doesn't have to be blamed. Before no-fault divorce laws were a thing, we had at-fault divorces, and women who were in an abusive or exploitive marriage didn't have very many options, especially if their husband didn't want to get divorced, because you would have to prove they did something wrong, and that's just very hard to do. It's also difficult because husbands controlled the family's finances. Remember, women didn't have access to credit until the 1970s, and so it was a very difficult process. California will be the very first state to allow no-fault divorce. 1969, Governor Ronald Reagan, actually. Fun fact, Ronald Reagan was the first president in U.S. history to be divorced. That was divorced. We've only had 2, Reagan and Donald Trump. But it was the very first place. By 1985, virtually all states had no-fault divorce. By 2010, all states do. And this has massive implications, one of them being female suicide decreases between 8 and 16% in every state where no-fault divorces were enacted. And there is a 30% decrease in partner domestic violence in states when states adopted no-fault divorce laws. So naturally, though, this led to a huge rise in divorce. And the rise in divorce will be absolutely enormous, especially when you get to the 1970s and 1980s. 1980s were probably the height of the divorce. The number of people are divorced, it was about 2.5 divorce per 1,000 marriages in 1965. And by 1980, it was about 5 per 1,000, so it doubled. Since then, it has decreased, and in 2021, it reached 2.5, so it reached the same point, same rate as 1965. But a big part of the reason for the decrease is the increase in cohabitation without getting married. So Americans will, no-fault divorce is absolutely enormous in women having more rights over their body and their happiness. And men, it applies to men too, but especially to women. For some reason, no-fault divorce has become controversial, and there are people who want to repeal no-divorce laws. If you want, anyone that wants to get rid of no-fault divorce laws to force someone to stay with them that doesn't want to be with them, I think needs to do some soul searching, because there's some bigger problems going on there. And by far the most controversial part of the whole women's rights movement, from then until now, Roe v. Wade. Feminists have been pushing for abortion, and this wasn't just true of the second strain of feminists. It was, broadly speaking, feminist-supported abortion rights. And in the landmark ruling Roe v. Wade, Supreme Court struck down all laws forbidding abortion in the first trimester. So Roe v. Wade specifically says states cannot forbid abortions in the first trimester, but states can regulate or restrict abortions after the first trimester. The basis of Roe v. Wade was also Griswold v. Connecticut, the right to privacy. This was a major, major victory for the women's movement in general, and it had been one of their big points they were fighting for. But obviously it was insanely controversial, and it will have the biggest effect of backlash of any part of the feminist movement. And it's especially true of very religious who will mount a very potent right to life crusade. And as we all know, Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022 in Dobbs v. Jackson. And so it is no longer, it is insanely controversial, though, to this day. Just going to note, one of the authors of one of the judges that oversaw that voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, Clarence Thomas. He actually said he wrote a minority opinion and said that every single case involving Griswold v. Connecticut ought to be re-examined, because Roe v. Wade was based on Griswold v. Connecticut, and he said all cases from Griswold v. Connecticut should be examined. And he mentioned Lawrence v. Texas, the one decriminalizing homosexuality, Obergefell v. Hodges. He did not mention Loving v. Virginia. That is the one he left out because he is African American and his wife is white. Anyone that says they think judges are impartial is really just lying to themselves. They just mean if a judge rules the way they like, they think it's impartial. But there's no logical reason to look at all Griswold v. Connecticut's other cases except the one that affected him personally. Judges are just politicians in robes that went to law school. So Roe v. Wade, though, was a huge, huge turning point, and to this day, one of the most controversial parts of the entire women's movement.